What do you do when 12 children vanish in a single night, and the entire town insists they never existed at all? Welcome to this journey into one of the most disturbing cases of collective amnesia in American history. But before we descend into these forgotten mountains, I need you to ask yourself, is there a truth so terrible that an entire community would choose madness over remembering? Tell us where you're watching from right now, and whether you believe memory can be a choice, because by the end of this account, you may understand why some stories are buried so deep that they become forbidden knowledge, and you might question whether forgetting is always an act of cowardice, or sometimes the only way to survive. This episode contains detailed discussions of missing children, death, and community trauma. We present this historical account with profound respect for those who suffered and were lost. This is not entertainment. This is testimony. If you're sensitive to discussions involving children in danger, please care for yourself first. In the basement archives of the West Virginia State Historical Society, there exists a photograph that appears in no official record of Blackstone Ridge. 12 children, ages 5 to 14, standing in front of a white clapboard schoolhouse. Their names are written on the back in faded ink. But according to every census record, every school enrollment document, every birth certificate from McDowell County, these children were never born. They never lived. They never disappeared. The photograph shouldn't exist, but it does. We're about to delve into a mystery that erased an entire generation from history, where 12 children crossed into darkness on a November night in 1947, triggering a silence so complete, so absolute, that it became its own kind of death sentence for everyone left behind. This isn't just a story about missing children. This is a question about how communities protect themselves from truths too devastating to bear. It was the year 1947. The Second World War had ended 2 years prior, and America was rebuilding, dreaming of prosperity, embracing the future with desperate optimism. But in the remote hollows of southern West Virginia, where the coal mines had chewed through generations of men and spat out widows and orphans, where mountains stood like prison walls against progress and the outside world, the future was just another word for hopelessness. And in one particular hollow, nestled so deep in those ancient peaks that maps often forgot it existed, desperation was about to birth something far worse than poverty. It was about to birth a silence that would last 76 years. The hollow had a name once, Blackstone Ridge, named for the dark slate that jutted from the mountain walls like broken teeth, for the shadows that seemed to pool there even at midday, for the way the place felt heavy, old, watched. 43 families lived there in 1947, clustered in houses that clung to the hillsides like stubborn barnacles, connected by dirt paths that became impassable mud rivers when the rains came. This was coal country, but not the profitable kind. The veins here were thin, treacherous, prone to collapse. The mining company, Allegheny Coal and Timber, operated what locals called a scratch mine, pulling just enough black gold from the earth to justify the company store, the company houses, the scrip they paid in place of real money. The men descended into darkness every day, knowing the mountain might decide to keep them. The women learned to listen for the whistle. 1 blast meant accident, 2 meant cave in, 3 meant come identify the bodies. But it was the children of Blackstone Ridge who really tell you what you need to know about this place. Thin, that's the word everyone used. Thin from hunger that was so constant it became invisible, just the normal state of things. Thin from tuberculosis that moved through the hollow like a visiting relative who never left. Thin from the kind of poverty that doesn't just take your money, it takes your bones, your teeth, your future, your choices, your hope. The school occupied a single room in a building that had been a church until the preacher died, and no replacement ever came. Their teacher was a woman named Eleanor Pritchard, age 31, a widow whose husband had died in a cave-in 1943. She taught because teaching paid $12 a month in real currency, not script, and because she understood that education was the only ladder out of the hollow, even if it was a ladder most of these children would never be allowed to climb. Eleanor kept meticulous records. This detail becomes important later, crucial, even because in the chaos of what came after, her careful documentation would be the only proof that certain children had ever existed at all. In her ledger, she recorded not just attendance but observations. Daniel Kowalski, age 9, showed aptitude for mathematics. Sarah Beth Hendricks, age 7, could recite poetry after hearing it once. Thomas Weaver, age 12, had taught himself to read despite never owning a book. 12 of her students were special to her, the ones bright enough, resilient enough that with help they might escape. She'd been writing letters to charitable organizations, and in October of 1947 she received a response. The Children's Aid Society would send a representative on December 1st to assess scholarships and placements. Eleanor told the children on November 12th she gave them hope. She gave them a future to imagine. 3 days later, on November 15, 1947, all 12 children disappeared. The morning of November 16th, Eleanor arrived at the schoolhouse to find it empty. By mid-morning, she noticed something wrong. Her 12 hadn't come. She walked to their homes. At the Kowalski house, Daniel's mother Anna answered with flour on her hands. When Eleanor asked where Daniel was, Anna looked genuinely confused. "Daniel? I don't have a Daniel. Must be thinking of someone else." At the Hendricks home, Sarah Beth's father was repairing a wagon wheel. "No daughter by that name," he said. Never had a daughter. House after house, 12 families, the same response. Confused concern for Eleanor's mental state and absolute certainty that these children did not exist and never had. Eleanor ran back to the schoolhouse, grabbed her ledger, the names were there, the proof, and went to find the sheriff. Sheriff Wade Garrett was county sheriff, based in Welch, 12 miles away. When Eleanor burst into his office that evening, while died and clutching a ledger, declaring 12 children had vanished and everyone was lying, he assumed he was dealing with hysteria. But Eleanor was not hysterical. She was precise. She gave him names, ages, families. She showed him records. Something in her conviction made him pause. He drove to Blackstone Ridge the next morning and interviewed families. He checked houses, and he noticed things, wrong things. A child-sized bed in the Kowalski house, sheets rumpled. A set of girls' shoes by the Hendricks door, muddy, small, well, worn. A stack of schoolbooks in the Weaver house. Explanations were offered, plausible ones, almost. In his report filed November 19th, Sheriff Garrett wrote, "Evidence suggests children in question may have existed. Evidence also suggests community-wide coordinated deception. Recommend state investigation. Something is very wrong in Blackstone Ridge. The state investigation never came. County commissioners looked at the cost, looked at a report that sounded insane. An entire community lying about whether children existed, and decided Eleanor Pritchard's mental state was the real issue. Eleanor was advised to take leave. She refused. She stayed in Blackstone Ridge, asking questions, searching, documenting. On December 6, 1947, Eleanor Pritchard's body was found at the base of Widow's Drop, a 60-foot cliff. The county coroner ruled it suicide. Depression, they said. The stress of delusion had driven her to end her life. No one from Blackstone Ridge attended her funeral. When asked why, residents said they didn't really know her well. She'd only taught there a few months. Some thought maybe she'd never taught there at all. And that's where the official story ends. Teacher goes mad. Teacher kills herself. Hollow goes back to its hard life. Nothing to see here, except for that photograph. And Eleanor's ledger. And Sheriff Garrett, who would spend the rest of his life telling anyone who'd listen that something evil had happened. Something so wrong that an entire community had chosen to forget rather than face it. What could be so terrible that mothers would deny their children existed? The answer waited in silence for 56 years. In 2003, historian Dr. Rebecca Chen was researching coal mining disasters when a librarian mentioned an odd collection from an abandoned farmhouse, documents and photographs being donated. Among them was Eleanor Pritchard's ledger and the photograph of 12 children. Dr. Chen Cross referenced Eleanor's documentation with county records, census data, certificates. She found nothing, no record of the 12 children, but she noticed something else in census records. In 1940, Blackstone Ridge showed 197 people with 41 children. In 1950, after a different census taker enumerated the district, the population was 163, with only 16 children. 34 people had vanished from the official record. The discrepancy was explained as correction of previous enumeration errors. The 1940 census taker had been elderly and unreliable, it was noted. Dr. Chen drove to what had been Blackstone Ridge. The hollow was largely abandoned. The mine had closed in 1960. And most families had moved away. She interviewed elderly descendants who remained. Responses were vague. The past was past. Memories fade. One woman, 89, became distressed when Dr. Chen mentioned Eleanor Pritchard. "Don't dig up what's buried," she said. "Some things should stay in the dark where they belong." But Dr. Chen had found something else. A letter addressed to Eleanor, dated November 8, 1947, from a friend. "Stop. For your own sake and theirs, stop asking about the children. Some debts can't be paid in daylight. The mountain provides and the mountain takes. We did what we had to do. Accept this and leave. The mountain provides and the mountain takes." Dr. Chen found this phrase again in a folklore collection from 1930. 2. Interviews with elderly Appalachian residents about old beliefs, old bargains. The concept was simple and ancient and utterly barbaric. When a community faced existential threat, you could make a bargain with the mountain, with the land, with whatever old thing lived in the deep places. You gave the mountain what it wanted: the innocent, the young, the future, and in return the mountain provided. The mine would produce, the community would survive. Its folklore, Dr. Chen documented. Superstition. Nothing more. But then she found the Allegheny coal and timber production records. In November 1947, mine number 7 at Blackstone Ridge, producing 80 tons weekly and scheduled for closure, suddenly struck a new seam. Production jumped to 300 tons per week. The mine stayed open. Jobs were saved. The new seam was discovered on November 16, 1947. The day after 12 children disappeared, Dr. Chen went deeper. The pattern repeated. In 1931, 4 children vanished from census records. The mine discovered a new vein on the same date. In 1916, 8 children, same pattern. The pattern went back to the hollow's founding in 1890. 2. Every 15 to 16 years. Children vanished, mine was saved, everyone agreed to forget. Dr. Chen interviewed one more person, Robert Kowalski, age 73, in a Charleston nursing home. He'd been born in Blackstone Ridge, but left in 1948. She asked him about the hollow, about children, about what he remembered. He was silent for a long time. Then, you want to know how they made us forget? They didn't. We knew. We all knew. But there's a difference between knowing and speaking. They taught us the difference when we were young. Our parents took us to the deep shaft, the abandoned one that went down farther than any working mine. They showed us where the children went. And they explained that if we ever spoke, the bargain would end, the mountain would take everything. Everyone would die instead of just the few. So we had a choice: speak and kill everyone, or stay silent. What was in the deep shaft? Robert Kowalski looked at her with eyes carrying 73 years of knowledge. I can't tell you, not because I don't want to, because the words don't exist for it. There are things in the deep places, things that were here before coal, before mountains, before us. Things that are patient and hungry and very, very old, and every generation they feed. He died 6 days later. Heart failure, but Dr. Chen noticed he died on November 15, 2003, exactly 56 years after the 12 children vanished. She published her findings in 2004. Historians were skeptical: no bodies, no evidence beyond statistical anomalies, and one old man's testimony. But Dr. Chen had included the photograph. She'd used facial recognition software to identify the children. No matches in any database, except one. The software matched a girl in the front row, Sarah Beth Hendricks, to a gravestone photograph from Welch. The grave was marked "Beloved Daughter, 1930, 9 to 1947. The family name was Hendricks. Dr. Chen visited the grave. Fresh flowers appeared regularly. She waited and met an elderly woman placing roses. Margaret Hendricks, 91. "Is this your daughter?" Dr. Chen showed the photograph. Margaret looked for a long time. "I don't have a daughter, never did." But tears ran down her face. She placed the roses and walked away. "Then who's buried here?" Margaret stopped, didn't turn, in a voice so soft Dr. Chen almost didn't hear. The part of me that knew how to be a mother, the part that broke when I chose survival over truth, the part that died the night I helped carry my little girl down into the dark and left her there, screaming, because 12 children was better than everyone. That's who's buried there. I visit every week to apologize to her. She walked away and refused to ever speak to Dr. Chen again. That grave still receives flowers, every week. Margaret died in 2009, but the flowers continue. Someone is maintaining that grave. Someone is remembering. Someone is apologizing. Dr. Chen found one more piece of evidence. A diary discovered in 2007 during demolition of the last standing house in Blackstone Ridge. Eleanor Pritchard's diary. The final entry was dated November 15, 1947, 4:30 in the afternoon. I followed them. I couldn't stop it, but I could bear witness. 43 adults gathered at dusk at the deep shaft. They brought the 12 children, my 12, the ones I promised a future. Children were confused but not frightened at first. They brought lanterns. They opened the shaft, the entrance concealed under the old company office, sealed with a stone that took 12 men to move. The shaft descended at a sharp angle, rough, cut, far older than any mine works. They led the children down. I followed at a distance, down and down. The walls changed from coal to something else. Something that looked like stone but felt organic when I touched it, warm and pulsing. The air grew thick, hard to breathe, full of a smell like copper and rot and something else, something I can't describe. They reached a chamber. I hid and watched. The chamber was vast, the lantern light unable to reach the ceiling or far walls. In the center was an opening, a shaft within the shaft, dropping into absolute darkness, and from that darkness came sounds, movement, breathing, something immense and patient. The children began to understand. they cried, they begged. The parents apologized as they bound their children's hands. They wept as they explained this was the only way. They kissed foreheads and whispered prayers as they lowered each child, one by one, on ropes into that breathing darkness. The children's screams echoed, then changed, then stopped, and from below came sounds of feeding. When it was done, the parents stood in silence. Then the mountain gave its answer, a rumble. A shift. One man said, "The east vein just opened. I can feel it." And they celebrated, quietly, guiltily, but they celebrated. I understand now why they must forget. This cannot be known and survived. This cannot be spoken and borne. This is the kind of evil that destroys sanity through simple comprehension. But I cannot forget. I cannot be silent. These children will be remembered if I have to burn this hollow to the ground. I'm leaving now to meet Sheriff Garrett in Welch. I'm taking this diary and my ledger as proof. By tomorrow, everyone will know. By tomorrow, justice will. The entry ended there. Eleanor never made it to Welch. Her body was found at Widow's Drop, every bone broken. Ruled suicide. But Sheriff Garrett's private notes, discovered after his death in 1968, contained an observation never made public. Examined Pritchard's body. Injuries consistent with fall, but also signs of struggle, defensive wounds on hands, bruising on arms. Coroner refused to amend ruling. Something rotten at the core of this. But what can one sheriff do against an entire community's will to forget? Sheriff Garrett tried. He kept investigating quietly. He documented suspicious deaths. Anyone who asked questions seemed to have accidents. And with each death, the community's amnesia deepened. By 1950, even Garrett had stopped talking about it. Not because he forgot, because some battles can't be won. The mine continued operating until 1961, when Allegheny Coal and Timber went bankrupt. The hollow began to empty. By 2000, just a handful of elderly individuals remained. The deep shaft was sealed with concrete in 1960, one by new property owners planning strip mining. The seal was 4 feet thick, reinforced with rebar. Workers reported that during pouring, they heard sounds from below. Scratching, knocking. One swore he heard a child's voice calling for help. The development company abandoned the project in 1962. The land remained worthless. The hollow was left to decay. But in 2010, urban explorers posted videos online. They'd found Blackstone Ridge. They'd found the sealed shaft and broken through enough to get a camera down. The videos were removed within 48 hours, but fragments survived. In the footage, the camera descends into darkness. At an estimated 500 feet, the light illuminates a chamber, scattered across stone that looks organic, pulsing. Small bones. Hundreds of them, thousands, children's bones, some old, remnants of decades or centuries. Some newer, plastic toys, still visible among the remains. And something else, something moving in the darkness beyond the light. Something that made sounds when the camera's light hit it, not animal sounds, not mechanical sounds, but something in between. Intentional sounds, intelligent sounds. The explorers ran. They sealed the breach and drove away, swearing never to return, never to speak of what they'd seen. But they did speak, in whispers, and the story spread, until 2015, when the bones were officially discovered by the EPA doing environmental surveys. They sent a team down. They found the bones. The official report listed them as remains from an unmarked cemetery that had collapsed into an old mine shaft. The bones were recovered, catalogued, buried in a mass grave in Welch with a marker, "Unknown children of McDowell County, may they rest in peace." DNA testing was attempted. Of hundreds of bone samples collected, 47 were recent enough for testing. None matched any missing persons reports. But Chen compared the DNA to her database of Blackstone Ridge families. She found familial matches. Children genetically related to Blackstone Ridge families. Children who, according to records, were never born. 12 of the samples matched families from Aliner's ledger. Children who disappeared in 1947. The DNA gave estimated time of death, 60, 8 years ago, plus or minus 5. Exactly right, Dr. Chen published a follow-up in 2016 titled The Children Who Never Were: Mass Denial and Collective Trauma in Isolated Appalachian Communities. It documented everything. The bones, the DNA, the pattern, the bargain. The academic response was dismissive. Interesting theory about mythologies developing around high child mortality. The bone discovery was tragic, but explainable: a collapsed cemetery, poor records. The idea of ritual sacrifice. Obviously folkloric interpretation. Dr. Chen didn't argue. She simply asked one question in her conclusion. If these children died of natural causes, why does the pattern persist every 15 to 16 years? Why does the mine always produce immediately after? And why can't anyone who lived there speak about it without dying? She included a list in her appendix. Every person she'd interviewed, 17 individuals, all died within 3 years of speaking with her. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents, natural causes, the certificates said. Robert Kowalski, November 15, 2003. Heart failure, Margaret Hendricks, November 15, 2009. Stroke. The pattern was undeniable. Speak about Blackstone Ridge and die. Maintain silence and live. Dr. Chen herself died in 2018. November 15, 2018. Suicide. They said she threw herself from a parking garage. But colleagues noted she'd seemed happy, engaged in new research, showing no signs of depression. Her final research notes contained a single sentence written repeatedly: "The mountain is patient. The mountain is hungry. The mountain always collects its debts." What had she discovered? Perhaps it's what she'd been investigating: modern Blackstone Ridge. Because the hollow isn't empty. There are people there now, squatters, homeless individuals seeking shelter, drug users finding privacy, and they are disappearing, not frequently enough to draw official attention. But every November, around the 15th, 1 or 2 people who'd been living in the hollow just vanish. Their belongings remain, their campsites undisturbed. They simply cease to exist. A ranger report from November 2020, noted, investigated campsite of individual known to frequent area. Signs of occupancy as recent as November 14th. No signs of struggle or departure. Coffee still warm in cup. Sleeping bag still zipped. Person gone. No tracks leading away. Third such case this November alone. The mountain is still hungry. The mountain is still feeding. But now it takes those that no one will miss, those that society has already forgotten. The homeless, the addicted, the lost, people who exist in the margins, who disappear from census records while still alive, who society has already agreed don't quite count. The bargain, it seems, evolved. No longer requiring the community's active participation, they're gone, scattered, dead. The mountain takes what it's owed another way, from the surplus of forgotten people that modern America produces in abundance. People whose disappearances don't trigger investigations, don't make headlines, don't matter. Is it still happening? Consider this. In November of 2023, 3 individuals who'd been living in the abandoned hollow were reported missing by a social outreach worker. County sheriff investigated, found empty campsites, no signs of foul play. Cases remain open but inactive. In November of 2020, 4, 2 more, same pattern, same outcome, same indifference from authorities. And this past November of 2025, park rangers noted 4 individuals who regularly camped in Blackstone Ridge could no longer be found. 4 in 1 month. But these are people without families, without homes, without anyone to demand answers. So there are no answers, just more silence, more forgetting, more feeding. The hollow still stands. Empty houses slowly collapsing, trees reclaiming roads, nature erasing the evidence of human habitation. But the shaft is still there. The concrete seal has cracks now. 70, 3 years of freeze, thaw cycles, of earth settling, of time doing what time does. The cracks are wide enough that on quiet nights sounds emerge, if you're brave enough or foolish enough to stand there and listen. Scratching sounds, like small fingers on stone, calling sounds, like children's voices, distant and distorted, crying for mothers who forgot them, for a teacher who tried to save them, for a world that agreed they never existed. And deeper sounds, patient sounds, hungry sounds, ancient sounds, the sound of something that has learned that humanity will always provide, that desperation will always trump morality, that some communities will sacrifice their children for survival, and that modern society creates plenty of forgotten people to feed into the darkness. The story of Blackstone Ridge remains unsolved, not because we lack evidence, but because accepting the evidence would mean acknowledging something too disturbing about human nature. It would mean admitting that ordinary people, decent people, loving parents, made a choice to feed their children to something ancient and hungry because the alternative was watching everyone starve. It would mean recognizing that the distance between civilization and barbarism is exactly as far as one missed meal, one closed mine, one winter too harsh to survive. And it would mean admitting that we're still making that choice. Every time we look away from the homeless, from the addicted, from the people on the margins. Every time we accept their disappearances as inevitable, as just how things are, as not really mattering because they don't really count. We're feeding the mountain too. We're just doing it with indifference instead of ritual, with neglect instead of knives, with systemic abandonment instead of ropes and darkness. But questions remain, questions that haunt. What exactly lives in the deep places beneath Blackstone Ridge? Something ancient, yes. Something hungry, certainly. But is it a creature, a force, a consciousness so alien we can't comprehend it? Or is it something worse, a mirror that shows us exactly what we're capable of when survival demands sacrifice? Why every 15 to 16 years? Is it a feeding cycle, a generational curse, or simply the time it takes for a new crop of children to grow old enough, numerous enough, to be worth the taking? And the most disturbing question, how many other places made this bargain? How many other isolated communities faced the same impossible choice and chose the same terrible solution? How many other mountains are hungry? How many other forgotten hollows hide bones and secrets and ancient appetites? Perhaps these questions are meant to remain unanswered. Perhaps the not knowing is part of the bargain. Perhaps uncertainty is the price we pay for being able to sleep at night, for maintaining the fiction that such things don't happen, can't happen, aren't happening right now in places we've agreed to forget. To this day, flowers appear weekly on a grave in Welch, West Virginia. A grave for a daughter who officially never existed, maintained by someone who refuses to let forgetting be complete. And in that gesture, that quiet, persistent act of remembrance, there is both horror and hope. Horror because it confirms the truth of what happened. Hope because it proves that not everyone chooses to forget, that some debts of conscience cannot be buried, even after 78 years. that some loves survive even the darkest bargains. And on November nights in what used to be Blackstone Ridge, when the wind moves through the abandoned hollow, when the moon is dark and the air turns cold enough to freeze breath, when the mountains press close and shadows pool thick as water, people still report sounds emerging from the earth. Most dismiss it as wind, as imagination, as the mind creating meaning from random noise in darkness. But some know better. Park rangers avoid the area in November. Social workers won't enter the hollow after dark. Locals from Welch who remember the old stories, who heard whispers from grandparents who knew the truth, drive the long way around rather than pass through that cursed place, because they know what the rest of us have agreed to forget, that some hungers are never satisfied, only temporarily sated, that some bargains are never fulfilled, only renewed, that some places are hungry, and that the mountain always collects its debts. If this journey through darkness resonated with you, if you find yourself lying awake tonight pondering the distance between survival and monstrosity, then this channel has more truths waiting in the shadows. Subscribe if you're willing to confront the uncomfortable questions about human nature that history tries to bury. Leave a like if this account provoked something deeper than entertainment, if it made you question what you would do, truly do, if your children's survival required the sacrifice of someone else's. And in the comments, I want to know this. If you lived in Blackstone Ridge in 1947, if your family faced starvation, if the mine closure meant certain death for everyone you loved, and if the only way to save them was to sacrifice 12 children to something hungry in the dark, would you have done it? Would you have chosen the many over the few? Would you have bound your own child's hands and lowered them into that breathing darkness? Or would you have chosen principle over survival, morality over pragmatism, and watched everyone die rather than participate in something monstrous? There's no right answer. That's what makes it so haunting. That's what made an entire community choose forgetting over remembering. Because once you acknowledge what you're capable of when truly desperate, you can never unknow it. And sometimes the most merciful thing we can do is agree to forget. Until next time, remember the most terrifying stories are the ones that force us to see ourselves clearly. The ones that ask not, could this happen? But what would I do if it did? And sometimes the darkness we're really afraid of isn't in the mountains or the deep places or the things that hunger in the earth. It's in us. It's in the choice. It's in knowing that love and monstrosity can exist in the same heart, in the same moment, in the same desperate act. And that's the truth Blackstone Ridge tried to bury, that we're all capable of feeding the mountain. We just hope we're never desperate enough to have to choose. The children are still down there, in the dark, in the deep places, and they're still screaming for parents who chose to forget them. The question isn't whether you hear them. The question is whether you'll choose to listen, or whether, like Blackstone Ridge, like Dr. Chen's interview subjects, like everyone who learned the truth and died with it, you'll choose the mercy of silence over the agony of knowing. Sleep well tonight, if you can,